This is Chat, and we're in the creek today. So we are on the A&C property, and this is our beautiful Still Creek. And so today we're going to be talking to you about creeks. And one of the things that makes Alabama so special is the amount of fresh water that we have, and it's what contributes to Alabama's biodiversity. And so you might hear us talk a lot about Alabama's biodiversity and how much diversity Alabama has in our wonderful state, and that has a lot to do with how much fresh water we have. So Alabama has 132,000 miles of waterways in its lovely state. And so I've got a really cool map to show you. And you can look at this map. This is our state. Look how much blue is going on there. Look at all these waterways. And so a lot of these waterways, they start out in little creeks and streams like this. And they'll eventually, make their ways to rivers and larger bodies of water. So they might end up in lakes, but they might continue down into the delta. And so this delta region is a very unique region right here around Mobile. And it's full of biodiversity, and it empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. And so all of these waterways create just great habitats for lots of different wildlife. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But first we're going to talk about a little bit about a stream. So we're looking at this beautiful stream, and as you can see, the water is really calm right here. And you can see a couple of things happening here in this stream, believe it or not. And this stream always changes. So when it rains, the water level rises. So it looks nice and calm and serene and beautiful right now. But we've seen this creek, the water level can rise quite high. As you can see, the banks of this creek are high, and we've seen the water level rise substantially. Some of you who have seen flooding areas have probably seen how forceful water can become when it floods, and it can become quite forceful, and it moves things. It can move rocks, it can move trees, it can cause a lot of damage. Water can become very powerful. You see this big tree down here, and we are always coming and checking our little section of the creek to see what's changed. So as the stream meanders, okay, and it meanders because it's moving slowly, so it's just doing this meander versus the faster it gets, the straighter it gets. And as it's doing its little meander, you're going to see a curve. So we're in a curve right here. And if you're looking at a curve, you're going to notice, and you can see it especially down here further. Let's actually walk down here. I like what's going on down here. You're going to see two sides of the creek. You're going to see this side in which we've got a beach, and this side has lots of sand and rocks, and that's very characteristic of creeks here in Alabama. They're going to have sandy bottoms, and they're going to have smooth pebbles and rocks, and these have been made smooth by the water tumbling over them for so long that they've been made smooth. And you can look at this curve here, and the curve is cutting to the right. And on the outside of the curve, the water is moving very, very fast. And as it's moving so fast, it is cutting into the side of the creek. And so that's where the water is moving the fastest. And as it's cutting in there, it's causing erosion. So on that outside of the bank, you can see it's causing erosion happening. It's taking away parts of the creek with it. That's why on this side, you can see that there's roots exposed and things like that. It's because that's been the cutting edge of this curve and this meander. And then on the inside of the curve, where water is moving slower, things have been picked up and dropped off. And that's where you have deposition happening, where things have been deposited. And that's where you get your beaches. That's where you get your sand and your pebbles and rocks and things on the inside, where things are moving slower. And you can see that really nicely right here in this curve. And then you can also look at the way the water moves. And so there's lots of different sections of the creek. And a nice creek has a lot of different habitats within it. It has areas that the water is really shallow. It has areas where the water is really deep. And if we're looking along this area, it's kind of nice and calm. And we'd call this area a run. And then where the water picks up faster, and there's lots of movement in the water. We call that a riffle. And then over here, where the water is very deep and hardly moving at all, we call some of these areas pools. And different animals like to live in these different little microhabitats. And we're going to talk about some of these animals. And as we're walking along the creek, we see lots of habitat, not just in the water, but outside the water. And we know that animals come through and cross. This is a nice crossing for animals. We can see that there's some animal tracks over here. They've been kind of washed away by rain, so I can't quite tell what animal was making tracks. I have a suspicion it might be an armadillo, but it's really hard for me to tell. They were really dug into the sand and it's kind of been washed away, but they have some 3 toes up on one of their legs. They had 3 toes, so it's hard for me to tell, but they were coming up this way, digging into the sand. And so they came down and they were crossing the creek, maybe coming down for some water. And then areas where you have lots of buildup of debris, those are areas that a snake might like to lounge. And a lot of people, when they get in the water, they think the snakes live in the water. They're not actually living down in the water. They need to breathe air, and they're meant to live on land, but they might like to lounge beside the water. So some snakes, like water snakes and water moccasins, they'll live next to the water and they might go for a swim to catch some fish, and then they're going to go back to lounging next to the water. So they're a lot like us. They like to just lounge next to the water, but they're still a terrestrial animal. And some would say semi-aquatic. They like to spend a lot of time in the water, but not live there. There's something cool over here. There's some funguses that really like to live here. This is wood ear, or some people call it old man's ear. It does look like an ear. It kind of feels fleshy. It's a little weird. It's a fungus. This is the mushroom part of the fungus. The rest of the fungus is living inside of this dead part of the tree, decomposing it. That's a cool fungus that you can find around creeks. Lots of cool aquatic plants can be found around here. Over to the right, we have something called jewelweed that's not quite blooming yet. And there's also lots of non-native invasive things that are popping up. We have popcorn trees that are popping up. We have privet and things like that here in Alabama we're always battling. That's part of it. All right, so we come over here. This is really nice. It shows a nice riffle, or a rocky bottom riffle. And there's just lots of movement in the water. This is a nice habitat for darters. So, we've got some animals to show you. And so before we show you some of these animals, we'll talk to you about how Alabama is America's Amazon. And so this is really cool because we have so much biodiversity. I mean, we're practically famous. It's really neat. I don't know if you knew this about your state, but we have a lot of cool things going on. And one of those things is, we are top 5. So we are number 1, meaning our state is ranked number 1, look at there, for 5 different things. One of them is freshwater fish biodiversity. We are also number 1 in crayfish species. We are also number 1 in freshwater snails, freshwater turtles, and freshwater mussels. And these are the statistics. 61% of North American freshwater mussels are found here. That's really cool. 19% of the freshwater fish species in Alabama are at risk due to pollution and destruction of habitat. And a lot of those are found in places just like this, because there's creeks just like this found all over Alabama. Here's the map once again. So we have a lot of really cool treasures that is precious to us here in Alabama that supports a wide array of wildlife that we need to consider. So this shows some of the fish biodiversity here in Alabama. A lot of unique fish that can be found here in Alabama, both game fish and non-game fish. And so this is a map. Of course, this is just a tiny fraction. There is a book called Fishes of Alabama, and it's a huge, big, thick book. If you're ever interested, there is a book. And then Crayfish of Alabama, also showing you different varieties of crayfish, also called crawfish or crawdads. Alright, and so to show you some of those, we actually went out earlier today and we used something called an electrofisher to sample part of our creek. In just a small amount of time, we were able to collect a sampling of animals from our creek. And so it was found right here. And an electrofisher just sends out a small electrical current into the water, temporarily stunning the animals so that we can collect them with a net. And so we were able to collect these animals, and they are obviously all fine. You can see they're all alive and healthy and things. And it just stuns them so that we're able to collect them easily, because some of these fish are hiding deep down in some of the deeper pools, or they're hiding in the riffles and they're hard to catch because they're so small. And so this allows us to catch them easily. So you can see in our first bin, these are some of the crayfish that we found here. This is actually the exoskeleton of one of the crayfish. So they shed their exoskeleton. So that's pretty interesting. And you know, we have currently 98 species of crayfish and counting. That number might have changed because I feel like they're always discovering new species. But these guys are really cool. They mostly like streams and creeks and things like that, but they can be found in other habitats. They're primary burrowers, so they excavate their own burrows. And sometimes if you look on their bellies, you can find their young. They'll carry their bellies on their young. And they do this movement where they scooch back using their tail, so that's a primary mode of locomotion. They're pretty fun to catch like that, and they do have these big pinchers, and as you can see, some of them have lost some of their pinchers. And so these are some really cool animals that you can go looking for here in Alabama creeks. And then the rest of the animals that we have for you today are actual fish species. So this next one is a mad tom. It looks a lot like, it's a relative of catfish. And so it's a little bottom feeder. You can see it has the whiskers right there. And so it's basically like a little tiny catfish. And we actually caught a pretty big catfish. We let him go because we weren't prepared to keep him today, but he was fairly large catfish that we actually found here in this small creek. And he was just hiding down in one of the deeper pools. And we've also found large bass here hiding in some of the deeper pools. I say large, I mean relative to this creek. You just would be surprised on how they find ways to hide in some of these places. And so we're sticking with animals that are hanging out in the bottom of the creek. These are darters, and these are Gulf darters. And I'm going to see, let me get my little net. So these are Gulf darters. And as you can see, they hang out down at the bottom of the water. They lack a swim bladder so that they can hang down at the bottom, and their fins go out flat. And so they like the riffle zones. So where the water is moving really, really fast, they hang out down at the bottom. And there is a difference between the males and the females. And so let me see if I can find the male. The males are more colorful. And so we did catch a male, and I was going to try to see if I could show him to you. So you can see this one up close. I don't think that's him though. Let's see. We have a lot of different darter species. They can be quite colorful. There's some species that are quite colorful. Yeah, this is the male. And so he has a lot of orange and blue. I'll see if you can see if I can get this off so you can see. So he has a lot of really pretty coloration on him. So these are little darters. These are Gulf darters that can be found here in our creek, but there's a lot of really cool darters. So there are some protected darters that we have in our state, and there are also some darters that are only found in our state. So that's cool. All right, and we have some shiners, and so these shiners are called stripes shiners. I don't really know how they got the name because, oops, they don't seem like they have stripes, but this is a striped shiner. They have little orange tips to their tail. And then this creature right here is a jawless fish called a lamprey. And this is a southern brook lamprey, and he's super wiggly. So he's gonna try real hard to escape from me. And I mentally prepared myself for getting his wiggly self, and I still failed. Okay, so let me try again. So, jawless fish, and I want to see if I can let you get a good view of some of his really cool adaptations. So, southern brook lamprey is the species. Super slimy, hard to hang on to. Doesn't seem like he doesn't really have like scales, like fish scales. You can see on the sides of his neck that he has these gills on the side of his neck. He does have what looks like a sucking mouth part, although he's not parasitic, so this type of lamprey does not actually suck onto other fish. So you can see his cool mouth part. That would look like a leech or something like that. But he actually eats like little tiny critters, and actually decomposing leaf matter and things like that. And these are pretty cool things, and we have actually seen them in the creek. They will do things like they build nests. They build little rock nests like some other fish, and they will take pebbles when they build their rock nest, and they use their little sucker mouth parts to take pebbles and pick up, and some other time the other lampreys will assist them in picking up their pebbles and help them move them to make their nest, which is really cool, to make their little nest. All right, moving along. So now we're moving, these shiners, they're more moving away from some of the bottom dwellers, although that lamprey will hide down into the deep murky parts. So about the only way we can, unless we see them moving pebbles to make their nest, about the only way we can find them is by using the electrofisher to get them out of whatever dark place they're hiding in. So these are a common sight in the creek. You can generally see these in the runs, the part of the creek that we call the run, pretty easily, because they're usually a large amount of them. And these are rough shiners. And calm down. And I want to show you, because some of them are in breeding colors, so they have some really nice color, and they'll look completely different other times of the year. And we've seen some that are more bright, with more bright red on them. So, and they will build. So the chubs build the nest, and then they reuse the nest that the chubs make, and they will actually swim over the nest to protect their nest. So sometimes you'll see a little pebble nest, and you've got all these pretty brightly colored shiners swimming in unison together over a pebble nest, which is really cool to see in a creek. If you ever get to see it, it's really neat. All right, moving along. We have any questions or comments or things like that before we keep going?
I had one question about where you are located right now.
We are at the Alabama Nature Center in Still Creek, and we do creek hikes as part of guided tours and things, but this is closed off to the public because parts of the creek, we try to keep it clean and stuff, but coming into a creek can be dangerous. There are snakes and other animals, and there can be glass, and so we try just to keep it to where it's guided groups so that we can just make sure that you stay safe And so this is a part that you might not have ever seen. You might have walked alongside it in some areas and seen it from a distance, but if you come out on one of our public days where we do have guided creek hikes, or if you come out on a field trip, you might get the privilege of having a guided creek hike with us. So this is a familiar sight. So we got some sunfish with their spiky little spines up top. So some of you might have seen this. Of course, you know, they can get quite large in some ponds and things. We have them in our catfish pond, upper pond, and we've seen some large sunfish that some of the kids can catch, but they are found here in our creek as well. And then I got a really weird one for you. That was our last one. This is called a pirate perch. Let me show you real quick. Oh, be still. Don't want to stress you out. Oh, and there's a dragonfly around my face. Okay. So this is a pirate perch. It's a pretty cool looking little fish. So let me show you this. Oh, he got caught in my net. And then I'll talk about him after. Oh, man. Slippery. Very tiny scales. It almost seems like he doesn't have scales at all. So it's very hard to hang on to him. So this is the pirate perch. And so these are pretty unique fish. They're in a taxonomic group all to themselves, so they're classified all by themselves. Not much is related to them, and it's because they're so unique. And they are, they're very interesting in that they actually, where they go to the bathroom is up near their mouth, and as they mature, it actually migrates closer to their mouth, which is really weird. So you can actually kind of age them as further away when they're younger, and it migrates closer to their mouth. So their name, their scientific name, actually kind of translates loosely into kind of like poop eater, you know, comes poop out of the mouth. That's what they do, essentially. Not really, but kind of. It's because it migrates, so it just makes them very, very unique because of that. And the other thing is, and scientists are trying to figure out exactly how they incubate their eggs. And so some theorize that they may actually incubate their eggs in their mouth or their gills. So we don't know for sure, but there's a lot of scientists that think that might be the case. So that's really cool, that they can do that. But we don't know much about them. They tend to be kind of a secretive fish. That's what scientists say when they have a hard time finding them and studying them and things like that. They say the same thing about snakes and other animals, that they're having a hard time finding and studying. So, but this is the pirate perch, and so very, very cool, very unique fish that we have here in our creek, and very neat to look at and learn about. So you should totally research more about them, especially because they're still studying it and we're still learning new things about it. And so you should look it up and see what else you can find about it, because I'm interested in knowing. If you find another cool fact about it, please let me know. I want to know. I want to know more. All right, so I want to know if we have any more questions about any of these animals that we have talked about, and see if we can take a real quick dip in the water. You know, if you have a net, something like that, and you go out to a creek, and you go up to a riffle zone like this, and you just gently take your net, and sometimes you might even can gently stir up the rocks a little bit and see if you can catch anything. You might find insect larvae, you might find fish, you might find anything like that. Didn't find anything this time, gonna put it back. But you might see what lives in waterways near you. We're gonna let all these fish go right back where we found them, because that's the proper thing to do, especially if you live in some areas. Ooh, real quick, there's some crawfish dueling it out and fighting. That's kind of cool. Might have missed it. They were totally fighting. So You might get to see some cool things in your waterways, but just be careful because you might actually have some protected species in your waterways. You never know, so we want to be careful and respectful of that. Another thing, just a quick note about creeks. We clean up trash in this creek all the time. In fact, if you go back to our Facebook page and look back, you might have seen where we had trash cleanup day, and we do it regularly, and I posted a picture of a huge bag of trash. And it's not that people come down to this creek and throw trash in this creek, it's that people throw trash elsewhere, and the rain washes it into a storm gutter, or it washes into a ditch, and it eventually makes its way into other waterways in Alabama. And it will make its way into our creek, and it can make its way into rivers, and it can eventually make its way into the delta. And so these are beautiful waterways full of very interesting and unique creatures. And so whenever you have your trash, make sure you properly dispose of it. Keep that in mind, because it can get washed away into areas like this, and it's just really a shame when we pick up all kinds of things that could have been properly disposed of. So keep that in mind. The other thing is, a lot of people like to stack rocks, and so that's become a very popular thing to do, is to go into the creek and stack rocks. And just remember that rocks are actually habitat for insect larvae, salamanders, and sometimes salamanders lay eggs under rocks and things like that. Whenever you're moving rocks around, you're actually disturbing habitat. And whenever you take rocks out of creeks and things like that, you're actually taking away habitat. So try to keep creeks and streams as natural as you can, because it helps protect that environment and that ecosystem and all the animals living there. So if you have any questions, do we have any questions before we go? Just remember that you can always comment even after this video is done and we're no longer live. You can comment your questions and I will do my best to answer them. Hope you have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and we'll see you next time.